At 6:17 on the morning we were supposed to leave for Miami. My wife sent me a text telling me not to come to the airport. I was standing in the kitchen with one hand around a mug of coffee and the other resting on the back of a chair. My blue suitcase waited beside the front door. Inside it were 14 days' worth of clothes, a new bottle of medication beneath my shaving kit, and a manila envelope I had carried from room to room for nearly 3 months without finding the courage to open in front of anyone. The envelope held my neurological reports. Early stage Parkinson's. Beside it was a folded floor plan for a small one-story house near Buckeye Lake. I had marked where a wider doorway could go, where we might eventually need grab bars, and which bedroom would catch the morning light Laura liked. The cruise was supposed to celebrate my retirement. More than that, it was supposed to be the place where I finally told my wife and Rachel the truth. I had planned the trip for 8 months. Laura's message took less than 8 seconds to read. Rachel wants this trip to focus on reconnecting with her birth father. We think you shouldn't come to the airport. Please don't turn this into an argument. I read it once, then again. The coffee trembled against the rim of the mug. I set it down before it spilled. For 23 years, I had occupied the ordinary spaces in Rachel's life, the places that rarely make it into photographs. I was there for weekday mornings, broken appliances, missed rides, bad news, and the quiet emergencies families stop remembering once they are over. Michael Grant had given her his blood and his last name. I had given her most of the days in between. Still, I did not call Laura. I did not demand an explanation or threaten to show up anyway. There are moments when anger arrives loudly, and there are moments when it settles into the body like cold water. This was the second kind. I called the travel agency. The woman who answered was polite in the practiced way people become when they sense a family problem on the other end of the line. She confirmed that Laura still occupied the cabin originally booked for the two of us. Rachel had another cabin, and Michael had been added to hers. Then she paused. Mr. Whitaker, your name was removed from the reservation 9 days ago. 9 days? Yes, sir. The request came from the email address associated with Rachel Brooks. For a moment, I looked at the suitcase by the door as if it belonged to someone else. The decision had not been made that morning. That morning was only when they had chosen to tell me, late enough that I could not interfere, but early enough that they still expected my credit card to carry the parts of the trip no one wanted to discuss. The agent explained that several services remained attached to my account: airport transportation, a hotel night in Miami, shore excursions, dining upgrades, and the card authorization for onboard expenses. I asked her to remove my name from every service I would not be using and to take my card off the onboard account. Some charges could be refunded, others could not. I told her to proceed anyway. Then I wrote to Laura. I won't come to the airport. I will also remove my name and card from any unused services. This is not punishment. I am simply not paying for a trip I have been excluded from. Her reply arrived almost immediately. We'll talk when we get back. I know you'll understand. That sentence hurt more than the first one. She did not ask whether I was all right. She did not say she was sorry. She simply trusted that I would absorb the wound, cover the cost, and return to my usual place when they were finished. I looked around the kitchen I had renovated myself, the cabinets, the counters, the loose hinge I had meant to fix before we left. For the first time, I did not reach for a screwdriver. Instead, I called Nathan Cole, the attorney who had represented my company for almost 20 years. When he answered, I said, I don't want to hurt them. I just need to know which parts of this life still belong to me. Nathan did not answer my question right away. He had been my attorney for 19 years, long enough to know that silence usually made me say what I was trying not to say. You told Laura what you were doing? He asked. I told her I was removing my card from the trip. That is not what I asked. I looked through the kitchen window at the maple tree Rachel used to climb when she was small. No, I said, I haven't told her anything else. Nathan asked me to come to his office before making another decision. While I waited, the house began offering back pieces of the life I had built inside it. Rachel was 7 the first time she called me Dad. It was January, The kind of Ohio night when the roads turned silver before the snow began. Laura was working late at the hospital, and Rachel had been running a fever since dinner. I called Michael twice because I thought a frightened child might want her biological father. He never answered. By 1 in the morning, Rachel had stopped arguing about the emergency room. I wrapped her in my coat, carried her through the snow, and drove with one hand on the wheel and the other reaching back whenever she whimpered. I spent 3 nights sleeping upright in a plastic chair beside her bed. When the fever finally broke, she opened her eyes, wrapped her hand around one of my fingers, and whispered, "Don't go, Dad." For years, I believed that one word had settled who I was to her. It had not. At her college graduation, I paid the tuition balance she never knew was overdue. Michael arrived late wearing a new suit and carrying a silver bracelet. When the photographer called for a picture with the parents, Rachel pulled Laura to one side and Michael to the other. I stood beyond the frame, holding her gown and purse. I told myself it did not matter. Love, I believed, should not need a witness. What I did not know was that Rachel had spent years carrying a letter from Michael in an old jewelry box. She had shown it to Laura once, but never to me. Michael had written, "I'll come back when I become the man you deserve." Rachel read those words as a promise. They answered the question she had been too afraid to ask: if her father had left. Was it because she had not been worth staying for? I had been present for most of her life, but presence had not erased that wound. In some ways, it allowed everyone to avoid looking at it. 2 weeks before the cruise, I dropped one of Laura's coffee cups. It slipped from my right hand and shattered across the tile. Laura hurried in, looked at the pieces, and said, "Tom, be careful." Rachel gave me that set. She was not cruel. She simply saw the broken cup before she saw the hand that had dropped it. 10 minutes later, she asked me to look at the faucet under the sink. I knelt on the floor, reached for a wrench, and waited for the trembling to pass. That memory followed me into Nathan's office. He listened, then asked, "Did they force you to solve every problem, Tom, or did you make sure nobody else had the chance?" I began to defend myself. Instead, I thought of bills I had quietly paid, apologies I had offered first, and consequences I had removed before Rachel or Laura had to feel their weight. I was taking care of my family, I said. I know, but being needed may have become the only proof you accepted that you belonged. The words embarrassed me because they were true. Maybe Laura and Rachel had learned to treat my dependability as something that could never run out. But I had helped teach them that lesson. I had spent 23 years making every broken thing disappear before anyone had to ask what repairing it cost me. Leaving would require more than saying no to them. I would have to stop measuring my worth by how much of myself I could use up. Nathan closed his office door before he opened the folder I had brought with me. Inside were the deed to the house, our prenuptial agreement, refinancing documents, bank statements, and a preliminary appraisal I had ordered 6 months earlier. I had gathered them before the cruise because I had already been considering a smaller home. Until that morning, I had imagined Laura moving with me. "I want to sell," I said. Nathan looked at me over the top of his glasses. "Before they come home? If possible." "No." The answer was so immediate that it cut through my anger. He explained that I had bought the house before the marriage and that our agreement protected most of my separate ownership. Laura had also signed a release of her dower interest when we refinanced. But 23 years of mortgage payments, improvements, and shared finances meant part of the increase in value could still be disputed. More important, Laura lived there. I could not lock her out, empty the house, or decide from my desk what a court might later determine belonged to her. "You can leave a marriage," Nathan said. "You cannot appoint yourself the judge of it." I told him I did not want to steal anything. "Then do not behave like a man trying to punish people before the law has finished counting what is theirs." He laid out the rules. We could file for divorce. I could remove my personal card from the cruise and stop new charges made solely in my name. I could open an account for income earned after separation, subject to proper disclosure, but I could not drain marital accounts, cancel Laura's health insurance, hide assets, or change every beneficiary as if 23 years could be erased with signatures. The house could be listed under a conditional agreement. A sale would close only after Laura consented or the court resolved the issue. Any disputed portion of the proceeds would remain in escrow. Laura would receive notice and reasonable time to relocate. If you want dignity, Nathan said, we do this slowly enough that anger does not become evidence against you. My right hand began to shake while I signed the first authorization. Nathan noticed. That is not just nerves, is it? I had avoided saying the word all morning. Once I did, it seemed to alter the air in the room. Parkinson's, early stage, 3 months ago. I told him about the shrinking handwriting, the stiffness in the mornings, the tremor around a coffee cup, and the unsteadiness on stairs. A month earlier, I had slipped on the basement steps and sat at the bottom for several minutes, listening to the empty house. I had not been badly hurt. What frightened me was that no one knew I had fallen. Does Laura know? No. Were you going to tell her? On the cruise. I opened the second folder. It held the plan I had intended to show my family. Sell the large house. Buy a one-story place near Buckeye Lake. Widen one doorway if necessary. And establish a medical reserve so Laura would not have to sacrifice her retirement if my condition worsened. I had even drafted the new ownership so both our names could be on the next house. Nathan studied the papers. They cannot fail a test they did not know they were taking. He said, I know, this is not proof they would have abandoned me. Then what is it? I looked at my hand. Proof that I no longer felt safe enough to be weak in front of them. We filed the petition that afternoon. I left Laura's insurance intact. I did not touch the shared savings. Nathan prepared the conditional sale documents and placed the disputed value of the house beyond my reach as well as hers until it could be resolved. Over the next several days, I removed only what belonged unmistakably to me, my father's toolbox. The chair I had built when my company was new, my medical records, an old carpenter's pencil, and a photograph of Rachel asleep against my shoulder at 7. I left Laura's clothes, furniture, photographs, and every room she still had the legal right to enter. I was not emptying the house to make her suffer. I was removing myself from a place where I had begun to feel like the most useful object in it. I learned most of what happened on the cruise months later. In fragments Laura and Rachel eventually chose to tell me. At the time, I knew only that the three of them boarded without me. The first problem came before the ship left Miami. At check-in, Laura handed over the supplemental card she had always used for travel. The agent ran it twice before explaining that it was no longer authorized for onboard charges. Michael took out his own card. Rachel told me later that he did not complain. He signed the form, smiled at her, and said, I owe you more than one trip. That was exactly the kind of sentence she had waited most of her life to hear. For the first few days, Michael seemed capable of becoming the man he had promised to be. Laura even posted one photograph from the first formal dinner. Rachel stood between them beneath the caption, a long overdue beginning. No one mentioned that the man who had planned the trip was sitting alone in Ohio. Michael remembered the name of the brown dog Rachel had when she was 6. He recalled taking her to a county fair before he disappeared from her life. He admitted that alcohol, unpaid debts, and shame had made him unreliable. I kept thinking I had to fix myself before I came back. He told her, then every year I stayed away made it harder to return. Rachel believed him because part of it was true. Laura watched them talk across dinners and morning coffee and told herself she had done something painful but necessary. Rachel had spent years wondering why her father had not chosen her. Now Michael was sitting beside her, offering an answer that did not make the abandonment her fault. The trouble was that Michael was better at explaining the past than preparing for the future. He paid the first few charges without comment. Then the complaints began quietly. The excursions cost more than he expected. The dining upgrades were unnecessary. Rachel could cover her own drinks. When Laura asked whether he might help if Tom refused to return home, Michael looked toward the ocean and said, let's not invent problems before we have them. Whenever responsibility entered the conversation, he moved it into some later day. We'll figure it out when we get back, became his answer to almost everything. One afternoon, Laura passed an older couple near the ship's cafe. The woman's hand shook as she tried to lift her cup. Her husband did not snatch it away or pretend not to notice. He steadied the saucer with one hand and waited until she nodded before helping with the other. Later, he fastened the top button of her sweater while she laughed at something he said. Laura stood watching longer than she meant to. She remembered the cup I had dropped, the way I had begun taking the stairs one step at a time. The doctor's appointments I described only as routine. The one-story floor plan she had seen on my desk and never asked about. For the first time, she wondered whether my silence had contained something more serious than anger. That evening, Rachel mentioned the hospital stay from when she was 12. Michael nodded quickly. I remember that. Which hospital? She asked. He looked toward Laura. Children's, wasn't it? It had not been. He remembered that Rachel had been sick because someone had told him. He did not remember the fluorescent room, the surgery, or the food she could not keep down afterward. I did. I had slept in a plastic chair for 3 nights and learned which hallway vending machine took dollar bills. Rachel did not accuse him. She only said, Tom stayed the whole time. Michael lowered his eyes. No one argued, but dinner ended early. By then, the photographs had already changed. In the first pictures, Rachel stood between Laura and Michael with both arms around them. In the later ones, there was always a little space between their bodies, as if the camera had begun recording the questions none of them yet knew how to answer. When they returned to Columbus, Laura expected anger. She expected my truck in the driveway, my voice from the kitchen, perhaps an argument that would last until midnight. What she did not expect was silence. Her key still opened the front door. Nothing had been thrown away. Nothing belonging to her had been moved. The couch, the family photographs, her dishes, and the blue quilt in the guest room were exactly where she had left them. But every trace that belonged only to me was gone. My work boots were no longer beneath the bench. My jacket was missing from the hall closet. The wooden chair I had built when my company was still one man in a truck had disappeared from the corner of the living room. In the garage, the space where my father's toolbox had rested for 20 years was a clean rectangle in the dust. Even my coffee mug was gone from beside the sink. Laura later said the house did not look abandoned. It looked carefully subtracted from. On the kitchen table sat an envelope from Nathan Cole's office. Inside were the divorce petition, the preliminary appraisal, and a conditional agreement to sell the house. The documents stated that no closing would occur until Laura consented or the court determined the disputed interests. Any contested portion of the proceeds would remain in escrow. There was also written notice that Laura could remain in the house for 30 days while she obtained legal advice and arranged new housing. If she needed it afterward, I had prepaid 1 month at an extended stay hotel. I had not left her without protection. I had simply stopped making myself part of it. My letter was on top. Laura, I have not taken your belongings or touched money that may legally belong to you. Nathan's office will handle every question through the proper process. I am not doing this because Rachel wanted to know her birth father. She had every right to want that. I am leaving because both of you decided my place in this family could be removed while my money remained useful. I do not want either of you harmed, but I will no longer treat my time, labor, or financial support as resources without an end. I am not taking your share. I am only refusing to pretend that mine is infinite. Tom. Rachel read the letter twice. Then she noticed another folder beneath the legal documents. It was the plan I had packed for the cruise. The first page was labeled, "The next years, Tom and Laura." Inside were the proposed sale of the large house, drawings for a 1-story home near Buckeye Lake, and a medical reserve intended to protect Laura's retirement if my health declined. A draft ownership document listed both our names. Attached was a note from my neurologist. Parkinson's disease, early stage. Laura sat down at the kitchen table. Only then did she understand that, while she had been planning how to exclude me from the trip, I had been planning how to make my illness less frightening for both of us. Rachel asked, "How long has he known?" Laura could not answer. Michael stood near the doorway, reading the room with the caution of a guest who had stayed past the easy part. Laura finally looked at him. When the 30 days are over, could I stay with you for a while? Michael did not say no. His apartment was small, he explained. His lease had rules. His work required travel. He needed time to make arrangements. Rachel stared at him. You said you wanted us to be a family. I do. Then what does family mean when someone actually needs you? Michael opened his mouth, but no answer came. Rachel went upstairs to the bedroom where she had spent most of her childhood. On the doorframe, the pencil marks were still there. Age 7. Age 10. Age 13. Beside the last mark, in my handwriting, were the words, almost taller than Dad. Rachel touched the faded line with 2 fingers. Michael had given her a name, a face, and a story about why he had left. I had measured the years she stayed. For the first time, she understood that fatherhood was not a title waiting to be reclaimed. It was a history built in ordinary moments, most of which had seemed too small to matter until the person who created them was gone. 8 months passed before I stood in the same room with all 3 of them again. By then, the divorce was nearly final. The house had been sold under the agreement Nathan negotiated, and the disputed portion of the proceeds remained in escrow until every claim was settled. I had moved into a 1-story house near Buckeye Lake, established a medical reserve, started physical therapy, and transferred most daily control of my company to a younger manager. I had also funded a small scholarship through the community college's existing foundation. It did not carry my name. It carried the name of Walter Hayes, the vocational instructor who had once let a broke 19-year-old use the school workshop after hours and taught him that skill could become a second chance. The college held a modest announcement in an auditorium that smelled faintly of dust and floor polish. I had just finished speaking when I saw Laura and Rachel near the back. Michael stood several steps behind them. Laura approached first. She looked older than she had 8 months earlier, though perhaps she was only standing without the certainty that I would catch whatever she dropped. I kept telling myself you were strong, she said. I used that word because it made what I did feel less cruel. I thought you would be hurt, but that you would understand. What I really meant was that your pain had always been convenient for me. I did not rescue her from the silence that followed. I am sorry, she said. I believe you. Is there any chance we could try again? I looked at the woman I had loved for more than 2 decades. Forgiveness had softened my anger, but it had not restored the life that anger once protected. I forgive you, Laura, but forgiveness releases me from the past. It does not require me to return my future to it. Her eyes filled, yet she nodded. I also need to say this, I added. I taught both of you that I would solve every problem before you felt its weight. I called that love because I was afraid being useful was the only way to be kept. Rachel stepped forward. I sent the email, she said. Mom agreed, but I was the one who asked the agency to remove you. She did not blame Michael or her childhood. She simply stood inside what she had done. I thought you would always be there, she continued. So I treated you like someone I could set aside and pick up again later. You had every right to know your birth father, I told her. Wanting that was never the betrayal. The betrayal was believing you had to erase me from the picture to make room for him. Michael moved closer, his face stripped of the charm that had carried him through easier conversations. I could have asked him Rachel's favorite food, her college major, or the name of the hospital where I had slept beside her. Instead, I asked the only question that mattered. When Rachel no longer needs a beautiful explanation for the past, can you stay for the ordinary part of her life? Michael looked at her for a long time. I don't know, he said. It was not a heroic answer, but it was honest. Rachel's expression changed, not with rage, but with the slow grief of someone releasing a dream that had once kept her alive. Then she asked about my health. I told them the diagnosis directly, early-stage Parkinson's. Manageable for now, uncertain later. Laura immediately offered to help. You cannot become my caregivers because you feel guilty, I said. Guilt is not strong enough to build a family on. I did not close the door completely. I gave Rachel a post office box address. Write to me, I said, but do not ask for money. Do not ask me to fix anything. And do not call me Dad because you think the word should make forgiveness happen faster. What should I write? Tell me who you are when you need nothing from me. She held the address with both hands, as carefully as if it were not permission, but the first responsibility I had ever placed entirely in hers. For the first time since the cruise, none of us asked the past to become smaller than it was. We simply stood there, each holding the part that belonged to us. A year after the message at 6:17, my life was smaller than it had been before. The house near Buckeye Lake had 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, and a porch that caught the evening sun. I went to physical therapy twice a week. Some mornings my hands obeyed me. Some mornings they seemed to belong to an older man I had not yet learned how to become. I was not healthier. I was not richer. But my days were finally arranged around what my body could carry instead of what everyone else expected me to carry for them. One Saturday, I was working on an old fishing boat in the garage when a rusted bolt refused to move. My right hand shook each time I tried to hold the wrench steady. Marcus Lee, one of the young tradesmen I had mentored, watched me struggle. "Let me get that," he said. "I can still do it." "I know," he waited. "You also taught me that a good worker is not the one who does everything alone." For most of my life, giving help had made me feel valuable. Receiving it felt like surrender. I opened my father's toolbox, took out the long-handled wrench, and placed it in Marcus's hand. The world did not end. Marcus loosened the bolt, then handed the wrench back without ceremony. That mattered. He had helped without treating me as helpless, and I had accepted help without disappearing inside it. That small exchange felt larger than any repair. Rachel's letters had begun months earlier. At first, every page was an apology. I answered politely and briefly. Eventually, she stopped asking me to look backward. She wrote about her work, the class she had started, and the afternoons she spent volunteering with the college's trade program. She told me she had helped Laura move into a small apartment. She described assembling a bookshelf by herself and admitted that one shelf leaned slightly to the left. "I am not asking you to fix it," she wrote. "I think I need to learn to live with a few crooked things." Laura wrote too. Her first letters still explained why she had wanted the cruise to work. I did not answer those. Months later, she sent another. "I used Rachel's need for healing to excuse the harm I caused you. I mistook your sacrifice for something I was entitled to. I am sorry without asking you to make that apology easier for me." I wrote back that I forgave her. The marriage remained over. After several months of Rachel's letters, I agreed to meet her for coffee. She arrived early and called me Tom. We talked about ordinary things, her job, my therapy, the scholarship students, the uneven bookshelf. When my hand trembled around the cup, she did not grab it. "Do you want help?" she asked. "Or do you want to do it yourself? You can hold the saucer." She reached across the table. "Okay, Dad." The word came out quietly, without being used as a key or a demand. I let it remain between us. That evening, I opened my father's toolbox. The photograph of Rachel at 7 was still tucked beneath the tray, its corners softened by time. I did not throw it away. The love in that picture had been real. But I did not place it beside my bed either. Forgiveness did not require me to pretend the wound had never happened. It only allowed me to stop carrying the knife. For most of my life, I believed loving someone meant staying until there was nothing left of me to give. I know better now. Sometimes the most human thing a person can do is walk out through a door that still opens and learn that his own life is also a place worth coming home to.